Okay, welcome to our next unit. We are now in Unit 9. In this unit, we're going to cover a couple big chunks of time. We're going to spend about a month on this unit. We are going to do the 1920s and the lead up to the 1920s. That's going to be our prosperity part. And then we are going to do the 1930s, leading us right up to World War II, where we see the depression part of this unit. I promise we'll kind of end on a high note, um, hopefully. So, for this week, we are looking at a little bit lighter of a week here. You can see you only have 2 assignments that are due as of Friday. So, hopefully, you watch the lecture on Monday. On Tuesday, you have 6 readings. You got 4 from the online part that you can find in your general channel, one of the tabs under more. And then you have 2 PDF readings, Prohibition, the Great Migration. On Thursday, you should work on the Harlem Renaissance poetry analysis. Pay close attention to the directions there. You are reading all of the poems that are in the document, but you're only analyzing four of your choosing. Make sure you're writing in complete sentences. Make sure you're noting which poems you're analyzing, and just really following the directions to get full credit on that assignment. And then Friday, you have a work day, so you can finish up whatever you need to finish up. Maybe start planning out your short paper for this unit. That short paper isn't due until March 19th, but know that week you are also going to have your test for this unit. You'll have an activity, you'll have readings, so you know how busy that week gets at the end of the unit. So you want to make sure that you are planning up until that point. Okay, so 2 assignments, Journal 21 and the Harlem Renaissance Poetry Analysis, are both due Friday at 11:59. Okay, that's enough of housekeeping. What do we have this week? Well, the section that we're working on this week is really the politics and the background leading up to the Roaring Twenties. So, what causes did we see? How did we get to this point that we reference as the Roaring Twenties? So, when we look at the kind of background leading up into uh, this time period, we have to pick up with where we left off last time. Now, we left off in the last unit with the end of World War I, the United States not joining the League of Nations under Wilson's advisement, and what we see as far as how the United States feels after World War I is that Americans really carry a hatred for war. Now, there's a few reasons for this. First is going to be the large loss of life. While the United States numbers as far as loss of life are going to pale in comparison to the European toll that was taken, there still is this feeling of we don't want to go to war, we hate war because we just sent our young men to die. And Americans will kind of harbor this feeling of we never want to go into a war like that again, especially when we did not feel we had a place in that war. Americans are also going to have these feelings of war is expensive, war costs money. We spent money giving to our allies in the beginning, we spent money getting ourselves in the war. Um, so it wasn't just that toll of the cost of life; it was the monetary toll that the war took as well. So those post World War I sentiments are going to be we never ever want to get involved in another conflict again, which leads us to our foreign policy belief of return to isolation. And that's really caused by the United States being absent from the League of Nations. When Wilson advises that the Senate Democrats vote down the League of Nations and we do not join, not only is there a significant loss for the United States as far as we're left out of all the conversations on the world stage, but there's a loss for the League of Nations as well. The League of Nations, those that did join, are going to lack in the ability to enforce anything that they wanted to do, any policies that they wanted to carry out, because the European nations that were included in the League had just been wiped out of their manpower that would be used as a military force. So without the United States, who was really the biggest power that had a an opportunity to put men forward to enforce using military, uh, there isn't anyone to do it. So the United States is not only hurt by not joining the League of Nations, but the League of Nations ultimately fails because of our absence. Um, so this return to isolation is going to hurt the global foreign affairs as well as the United States foreign affairs. And to further distance ourselves from these global affairs, we're going to see the Washington Naval Disarmament Conference, where there is a meeting of world leaders to decide to limit construction of warships to avoid an arms race. If you think back to World War one of the main causes was that militarism, that need to build up the military in case of an attack at any point. And this conference here is saying, okay, maybe we should stop that. We shouldn't, with the new technology because of industrialization that we have, be racing to get the biggest, best piece of equipment to fight in a war, the most destructive piece. And now this of course doesn't work, and this idea after World War One of wanting to have the biggest, strongest military with the scariest pieces of equipment necessary, it really just drives us into the future, where now we're competing to have the most nuclear weaponry and the most advanced technology in that way. But we try nonetheless. We try and try again. And the next piece that we try to push ourselves away from these global affairs is the Kellogg Briand Pact in 1928. This is going to be where we see nations coming together to make a pact to outlaw war. Now, we know that this doesn't work because there have been many wars since 1928, the biggest being World War II. So, these two examples here are not only ways for the United States to distance ourselves from global affairs, but to distance ourselves from any potential conflict, and really the world from any potential conflict moving forward. But throughout the world, you're going to see disagreements. Um, and now we have to come to a place after World War One to say, how do we solve these disagreements without a massive loss of life? And that's also what these are an example of, trying to solve conflict without actual physical conflict. So if we look, we just went over foreign policy leading up to the time period that we're looking at. Now we need to look at the domestic culture. And when we look at domestic, that means home front, okay? So in the United States, what we see is conservative policy. And the conservative policy is going to first cover retreat. Okay, retreat from foreign affairs, isolation, get away from every entangling alliance that could possibly be out there. That is how we go back to the basics. We go back to being very conservative. Think about like conservative dress, it's very mild, it's very held back. We are also going to reject these progressive reforms. Conservative policy says that the government should not get involved in social problems, and progressive reforms were all about the government getting involved in society. Conservative policy says nope, nope, nope. We're gonna reel back in these reforms that drew the federal government out into the social sphere, and we will reject those reforms. So going back to more of a laissez-faire, hands off. We are also going to return to focusing on U.S. production. We are not outsourcing. We have the industry now. We have the factories here where we can produce enough for ourselves. We need to focus on American-made products, and that's what conservative policy will go to reinforce. Um, we are also going to focus on reducing spending on war efforts. Remember, we just talked about the foreign policy, the post war sentiments. Nobody wants to hear the government utter the words military spending, okay? They just don't want to hear it. So, conservative policy is going to say we're going to cut back, we're going to reduce on war efforts, spending policies to really reel it back in. And that's where we see this coming through in the 1920 slogan of Warren G. Harding, return to normalcy. Uh, he says, let's go back to the way things were before this great war, before we got involved in foreign policy, before any of this crazy stuff happened in the world. Let's return to the normal way, the way that things used to be. Let's get conservative again. We are going to discuss an era of Republican presidencies of the 1920s. But before we talk about the specific presidents of the 1920s, we need to talk about what Republican presidencies looked like. And I love this image that's on your screen right now. The only fair is laissez faire, because Republican presidencies can be just strictly summed up by hands off. Okay, the first thing, and this kind of contradicts what I just said, but they want to put in place a high protective tariff. Now remember, we said a tariff is a tax on imported goods. A protective tariff protects American manufacturing, encourages American manufacturing. This relates back to that conservative policy that we were just talking about. We want to encourage U.S. production. Republican presidencies are going to hammer in on this high protective tariff that's encouraging American manufacturing. They also want a less progressive tax policy. Remember, we saw during the progressive era the graduated income tax, the progressive income tax be passed. We don't want that anymore, because we're hoping that if we put, and this ties right into supply side economics, we are hoping that if we reduce the taxes, that puts more money in the hands of the people who have money. And if they have money, people spend money, that goes back into the economy. We just see this rolling cycle of, okay, there's money in supply, people will spend it. Hopefully they spend it on American made products, and that keeps the economy running. During these Republican presidencies, we're also going to see trickle down economics be pushed for. This is where we are going to see the government lending money to big business and banks, hoping that it will trickle down to the consumer. Now, I might be a little biased here, but I'm going to tell you this never works. The government says, oh, we'll give tax breaks, we'll give money, we'll give loans to these big businesses because they're making products that people will buy, and that's going to trickle down to them. Or we'll give money to these big businesses and they'll hire more people and there'll be more jobs. That means more people that have money. That's great for the economy. No, no, no. What happens with trickle down economics is the top that's getting the money gets the money and hangs on to it, and that's going to be a big piece that we see a big snowball rolling down the hill that leads us into the depression of the 1930s. But the Republican presidents of the 1920s are definitely going to try trickle down economics. we're going to see trickle down economics come back in the 80s. Doesn't work then either, but we'll try it again. Why not? We just tried it in the last presidency. We tried trickle down economics. We tried supply side economics. Doesn't work, but we keep trying it. History repeats itself. I'm telling you. But what all of these pieces of the Republican presidencies add up to is the government is returning to laissez faire. The government is returning to hands off. They are ending the trust busting era that had started during the progressive era, and they are going back to the policies of let business be business. Let's go back to a time where the federal government is shrinking itself, that's not getting involved, because that's what the Republican presidencies want to do. They want to step away from big business to allow big business to grow. So think about just hitting the reset button on all of the things that we did during the progressive era. I know, I'm beating my head against the desk as well. Our first Republican president that we have to look at is Warren G. Harding. He is going to be our president from 1920 to 1923. He comes from the state of Ohio. He was a senator in the state of Ohio, a Republican senator in the state of Ohio. He supports a high tariff. You will notice that each of these presidents that we go over in the 1920s that are Republicans are going to support those Republican presidency pro-business policies that we just went over. So he supports the high tariff. Remember, tax on imported goods. He also is going to oppose the League of Nations, go back to that conservative policy, retreat, retreat, retreat. No more getting involved in the entangling alliances. His running mate, and this will be important because we're going to see this guy come back, his running mate is Calvin Coolidge. He runs against the Democrats James Cox and the famous Franklin Roosevelt. So the Democrats are easily defeated, and a lot of this has to do with the fact that Wilson was a Democrat. When Wilson was a Democrat, we got into World War I. This idea happens all of the time. When we see a big event happen during a presidency, sometimes it is time to change hands. Let's try out the other political party, see how they handle things. So again, we see a shift here going from the Democratic presidency of Wilson to the Republican presidency of Harding. Harding's slogan is going to be a return to normalcy. Let's get back to the way things were before the war, and even let's rewind things back to before that, before even the Spanish American War, and let's go ahead and get back to this hands off time period. Harding is going to conduct what's known as a front porch campaign, where he literally gave speeches from his front porch. This gives me very Jacksonian democracy vibes because he's talking directly to the people in a way that is simple, in a way that is relatable. It's a very smart campaign. And it proves to be very smart because Harding is going to win the election here, the first election where women are voting. Notice 1920. And he wins the popular vote by over 60%. And this is huge. So we are seeing a very loud and clear message from the people that they want to return to normalcy. They want to forget that Great War. They want to move forward, and they want to never go back to where they had just been. Let's go on to brighter times. And when Harding promises that to them, they take it hook, line, and sinker. But we are going to learn Harding's presidency was not all fancy pants and great and wonderful sunshine and butterflies, because Harding is going to surround himself with friends and political allies from Ohio in the White House. He is going to fill his cabinet with these buddies. These members are going to be known for their abuses of power. They are going to be known for their betrayal of the public's trust, and they are going to be known for the illegal dealings that they take, such as bribes and kickbacks, which lead to financial and political scandals. Now, what I mean by bribes and kickbacks is I mean they would pass or encourage the passage of legislation that would benefit their own favor. So, say they're involved in a business, they would pass a piece of legislation that would make them money in that specific business, and that's a kickback. That is highly illegal, hence the political scandal. Now, what this ultimately does when we see people in places of power, such as those in the Ohio gang, is we see that the people start to distrust the government because they see people that they trusted, such as Harding, winning that popular vote by such a large percentage, going against their word. And this makes people distrust those in power because they chose him thinking that he would lead in a way that would be positive for the people, but instead he makes a terrible decision right from the get, filling political positions with his friends and allies. Again, I'm getting real Jacksonian vibes here. If we remember the kitchen cabinet, filling them with officials that weren't really worthy of the position, the spoil system. I'm feeling all of those vibes from before the progressive era. I thought we had fixed these problems, but you're going to learn we definitely did not. What Harding's presidency really gets scarred by is what we know as the Teapot Dome scandal. The Teapot Dome scandal is going to begin with Albert Fall. Albert Fall is going to be the Secretary of the Interior. Now, the Department of the Interior is responsible for the management and conservation of most of the federal lands and natural resources. It oversees agencies like the Bureau of Land Management, the United States Geological Service or Survey, and the National Park Service. So Albert Fall is going to be appointed to the Secretary of the Interior position. Now, what happens is in 1921, Fall is going to arrange to have the oil reserves in Elk Hills, California, and Teapot Dome, Wyoming, to be under the control of the Interior Department. Now, the Navy Department was typically in control of these reserves to use in case of emergencies. But what Fall does once he gets control of these oil reserves is he is going to lease the land to oil men in return for bribes. Now, what this really proves to do is that he's neglecting the Navy. And he's making money on his own decisions here. So, this is just one example of the political scandal that we see during Harding's presidency. There is going to be an investigation in 1924 that is going to find Fall guilty and send him to prison. And this is going to leave a terrible name on the Harding presidency because Fall was nominated and approved by Harding, and he takes advantage of his position in order to make money while neglecting a respected piece of the government, the Navy, all at the same time. So this is going to be just one of the issues that Harding had during his presidency with his Ohio gang. And this brings us to the end of Harding. Harding is going to go on the campaign trail in 1923, ready for a second term. He goes cross country to promote his campaign. And while he is on that tour, he will become ill and die of a heart attack. The Teapot Dome scandal is going to be made public in 1924, so a little bit after he dies, and that affects his public image and the way that people viewed Harding. Now, with a 60% popular vote win, that just went to prove how much people loved Harding. And when the Teapot Dome scandal comes out, it is a huge scar on his presidency. And his presidency is forever known for the scandal. Look at us. This is what we're talking about when we talk about Harding as is. We're not talking about any of his policy. We're not talking about anything else that he did in his presidency. We're talking about the political scandal that marred everything else that he could have possibly done as president. So the legacy of Harding here is left up to the scandal. Now we're going to cover one more section of our notes here, a little bit more politics and economics of the 1920s. And we're going to start right where we left off with Harding, and we're going to slide right into Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge is a name that you should remember from Harding because this was his running mate. He is going to take over the presidency when Harding dies in 1923, and he is going to be president until 1928. He is known as Silent Cal. He was the exact opposite of Harding, where Harding was pretty much a schmoozer. He could really talk to the people. He was a guy's guy. Coolidge is going to be a very conservative, silent type. And I always love his campaign slogan, "Keep it cool with Coolidge for president," as if that was super interesting. I guess back then it was probably very clever. In our times, it's not quite. Coolidge is going to be known for his pro-business conservative policies. And what I mean by that is he wants to make the government lean and efficient. And the way he's going to do that is by raising money through the tariff. He's going to place a huge amount of trust in big business, and the tariff is going to help him explain the trust that he puts in big business. He says, the business of America is business. We need to support American-made products, and the way we do that is by putting a tariff on imported goods and making sure that people support that business. Now, the uphill battle that Coolidge is going to have during his presidency is that he has to rebuild the trust of the public. He's coming right off of the Teapot Dome scandal. He has to convince the people that he is here for them. He is building a government that is not taking bribes, but instead is there to help the people. And the way he's going to do that is by filling his administration with those that believe in the virtues of an older America, that the government should take a step back, the federal government should take a step back and let the people do what they do. The goals of Coolidge's presidency is going to be first to reduce the national debt that we had accrued over time and through World War I. He wants to trim down the federal budget, which makes sense because unless we trim down the budget, we're only adding to the debt. And he wants to lower taxes to give incentive for businesses to build. So taking back those federal restraints on business in order to let them grow. Now, if this is not giving you any flashbacks, when we take back the federal restraints, allowing for business to grow, they will do just that. And they will do just that by creating terrible business practices that eat up smaller businesses, and that doesn't necessarily go with the business of America as business. But whatever they choose, they already did it. We can't do anything about it. He is going to win re-election in 1924 because people are coming off of this Harding's death. The Teapot Dome scandal hadn't really full-fledged come out yet. They trust the Republican Party. And under Coolidge, we are going to see some success. It's not going to be bad during this time period here. And what we're looking at is the economy is going to be on the rise. Industrial profits are going to be generated. There's going to be growth in the stock market. All of these things that people see as a positive here. So he takes the popularity that he gets from the win in 1924 and pushes forward to grow the nation in a more positive direction. But what we don't realize that's happening while all of this positivity is going on is that there are problems under the surface, and these problems are going to lead us to the crash in 1929, the depression of the 1930s. And these problems that are starting to bubble include the plight of farmers. We have farmers out west that no one is paying attention to any of the practices that they are using. And remember, a high protective tariff hurts farmers. It does not help them. So when Harding and Coolidge push for this high protective tariff, we are hurting our farmers. Labor unions are going to be demanding change in the workplace because remember, the government is becoming more hands off. They're reversing those progressive era reforms. They're loosening the restrictions on big businesses or on business in general. And that creates worse conditions for workers. So we are going to see unions again coming together and demanding change. We are also going to see discrimination of minorities. Not only are we seeing discrimination, and we're going to talk about this in depth a little bit more in the following sections that we do, we're going to see discrimination against immigrants coming to the United States. We're going to see discrimination against African Americans, which you are going to see in your poems that you read for this week and the discussions that we have in class. So it is not this happy-go-lucky America that everything is great and super shiny. We are quite frankly repeating the Gilded Age again. On the outside, it looks great because we have this rise in the economy. Profits are up in industry. The stock market looks great. But underneath, we are going to see that the United States is having problems. We go back to those worker problems again. And this time, we are going to see a bigger uproar in your face against minorities. That's going to include African Americans, Mexican Americans, and immigrants. Coolidge believed that the role of the government as a Republican is to stay out of social issues. We are reversing the role of the government from those progressive era reforms. So when we hear these problems underneath the surface, the government is not going to come to the aid of the people who are demanding change again, or at least demanding the government keep up with their end of the bargain. No, these problems are going to compound, and that is why during this time period from 1920 to 1928, we see these small problems that could have been solved by government intervention turn into big problems that lead to an economic downfall. But I digress. We have to talk about the prosperity first. We can't forget about all of the prosperity. During this time, we are going to see the rise of the automobile. We have Henry Ford, who revolutionizes production, wages, conditions, daily life. Ford is going to introduce the Model T in 1908. This is going to be the car for the average American. He is famously known for saying you can have it in any color as long as it's black because the car was mass produced. We are not mass producing in different colors. We are mass producing in one color. This is done through the assembly line. He is not the inventor of the assembly line. Some people get that mixed up. He revolutionizes what it looks like to use the assembly line in a mass productive way. The Model T is going to be the first car that's made that the average American can afford it. And because of that, we are going to see the effect on the nation. Ford changes the work day and the work week. Ford is going to introduce the 8-hour work day, and he is going to introduce the work week of Monday through Friday because he gives his workers Saturday and Sunday off. So Ford, while he is going to be this conglomerate, this big business owner, he is going to create the work week that we know today. Now, because of the mass production of the Model T, it reduces the price because if we think back, when we have a high supply, price goes down. So the price of the car is significantly dropped, which allows for the average American to purchase it. Now, because the average American can purchase the car, that means that we don't have to live in the cities anymore. We now can move outside the city and become a commuter, which leads to the creation of the suburbs and the idea that you can drive into work. You don't have to live around the corner anymore because now we can live further away. And it's actually better for us to drive into the city for work than it is to live in these cramped cities. Other effects of the automobile that we are going to see uh, industries that are related to the automobile take off. Okay, the steel, glass, rubber, asphalt, wood, gasoline, insurance, and road construction. All of the things that go with a car are going to be industries that take off as well. Because of the car, because of people moving to the suburbs, the government is going to introduce the highway system in 1926, which causes a road construction industry boom at the time. Now, what we see while we see an increase in the use of the automobile, we are going to see a decline in the use of public transportation. That just makes sense. So, trolleys and trains inside the cities are going to see less use. The idea that families can vacation becomes more popular. We can hop in the car and we can drive somewhere. You don't have to just go down the street to the movie theater. You can go to a destination spot now. So we are going to see vacation destinations, that industry also boom during this time period. Also, a part of this economic prosperity that we see, and this is the part that I need you to kind of highlight in your brain, is the consumer revolution. We are now coming up with new and affordable goods that are made available to people. Okay, the consumer revolution. We are now targeting things that can make average activities easier, such as housekeeping. All of the ideas of housekeeping become easier. We have washing machines, we have irons, we have vacuum cleaners. You no longer have to spend your entire day doing the wash. Okay, you can do it quickly and easily. And the way we are getting these new and affordable goods is through the new ways of buying. Uh, the new ways of buying first include buying on credit. So if you're lacking cash on hand, you could buy on credit. You could say, I'm going to charge it, put it on my account. It's kind of like having a tab at the stores. Um, and this really opens up people to take product home that day that maybe they wouldn't have purchased before because they didn't have the cash in their hand. Another new way of buying is going to be installment buying. Installment buying is putting a small amount down and then paying a monthly bill. Okay, we have this today. Okay, it's like taking a loan out at the store. It's very similar to layaway. Okay, making a small down payment and then paying monthly on it. I know it doesn't sound like these are revolutionary ways of buying, but at the time they really were. There was, before this, if you didn't have it, you couldn't buy that product. But now, if you don't have the money, you can take the product home. And this is going to be the biggest piece that causes us the problems that we see moving into the late 1920s, early 1930s, because people are not actually putting money into the economy, but they are taking products home. And our economy is going to be built on this empty, hollow ground. Okay? By borrowing the money to make the purchases, consumers are taking products home that they would have previously saved years to buy up. but now you get to take it home that day. And a lot of this is due to the influence of advertisements. Magazines and newspapers are now going to be using advertisers who are strategically targeting audiences using psychological and scientific research. And all of this is going to be made possible because of the availability of electric power. This all aids, the electric power aids in this consumer revolution. Now, during this week in class, we are going to talk more about the culture of the Roaring Twenties and how these different pieces that are happening in the economy, in politics, affect how people act during the 1920s. Do not forget about your 2 assignments that are due this week, Journal 21 and your Harlem Renaissance Poetry Analysis. And you can also start working on that unit paper, the short paper that is not due until March 19th. Any questions on any of this, please let me know.